Hi, I'm Lindsey, and I'm talking with Medtech industry leaders on how they change lives for a better world.
The inventions and technologies are fascinating, and so are the people who work with them.
There was a period of time where I realized fundamentally my job was to go hang out with really smart people that are saving lives and then do work that would help them save more lives.
I got into the business to save lives, and it is incredibly motivating to work with people who are in that same business, saving or improving lives.
What better industry than where I get to wake up every day and just save people's lives?
These are extraordinary people doing extraordinary work, and this is The Leading Difference. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Leading Difference podcast. I'm your host, Lindsey, and today I am delighted to welcome as my guest, Omar Ford. Omar is an experienced editor-in-chief, currently at MD+DI, with a demonstrated history of working in the medical device industry. Skilled in medical devices, technical writing, marketing, strategic planning, and marketing strategy, he also has a strong media and communication professional background with a bachelor's degree focused in journalism from the University of South Carolina, Columbia. Well, hello and welcome. I'm so excited to have you here today. Thank you for being here, Omar.
Lindsey, I'm excited to be here as well. I have been prepping for this all week, and then all the little notes and all the things I took down. I said, you know what? I want to give her the original experience, so I'm going to chuck them to the side, and we're just going to do this off the top of my head. How's that?
That's perfect. My favorite.
Awesome.
Brilliant. That's how conversations work in real life. I feel like this shouldn't be any different. So great.
Yeah, okay.
All right.
Agreed.
Love it. All right. So would you mind starting off by telling us just a little bit about yourself, your background, and what led you to Medtech specifically?
Oh, wow. So that is an interesting story, what led me to MedTech. But a little bit about myself first. So I graduated from the University of South Carolina in 2001 as a print journalism major. And my goal was to go into newspapers. I wanted to be that next print journalist because I had a face for radio, right? I had a face for print. Wasn't the broadcast type. And so I did small newspapers for a few years. And then this magical thing called marriage happened. And I was looking at the salary that I made as a print journalist, and it just wasn't enough to sustain a family. So I was looking at branching into something else. And back then, we had the classified ads in the newspaper where they would actually advertise jobs. And my wife pointed this one out to me, and it was a job for a company called AHC Media, and they had a publication called Medical Device Daily, and that was around, I want to say 2007. And she said, "Why don't you try it? The pay, because they advertised the pay there too back then." She said, "The pay is much more than being a newspaper reporter. You can leave that. That's something that you can do to support the family." And I said, "Yeah, why don't I try it?" And there were a lot of adjacencies, so I jumped on it and got hired and left the newspaper behind. And that was in 2007, and I've been with MedTech ever since. So it's been an incredible journey. It's been one that you kind of, once you jump in, there's like a steep learning curve. But if you manage to stay in for a few years, you can really learn a lot about the industry.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. Lots of questions. I'll start with that learning curve because I was just thinking about this.
Yes, go ahead.
So you go from, I might imagine, a more generalist approach to all sorts of different topics to a really crazy niche industry where somebody can say a full sentence, and if you're not from the industry, you're like, mm-hmm.
Yes, exactly.
So
Yeah.
what was that like for you, and how did you navigate that steep learning curve and your own personal growth so that you could, really speak to the industry?
So going back to the head nod, a lot of my interviews were like that at the very beginning. But I remember the editor-in-chief of Medical Device Daily, he's now deceased, Don Long. He pulled me to the side one day and he said, "Omar, each of these companies has a story, and you want to be able to tell that story You look at it from a business sense, and then you drill down into the innovations. When you get a press release from a company such as a Boston Scientific or an Abbott Laboratories or a Medtronic, you want to drill down in the press release and look at what the news is, but you also want to look at the story that they've been telling up until now about that product or about that sector that they're in. If they're looking to get approval for a device, was it easy for them to go through clinical trials? Was this something that bombed a couple times or that was rejected by FDA? Each company has a story about their innovation, right? And you look at the company as your sources, like they're your county commissioners, or they're your, I'm going back to my newspaper days, or they're your board of education members. Each company has a personality like that. And you try to hone in on that and you look for those adjacencies. And then you kind of fill things in as you go along. The other thing that helps is traveling to some of the trade shows and talking to the people and meeting them face to face. Because back when I started, we had this wonderful thing called a landline, a telephone, and we could call people and get messages, right? There were no Teams calls or no Skype or anything like that, or Zoom. In fact, I don't think there's Skype anymore. But you know, you didn't have that. So you just heard a person's voice. But when you met them face to face, when you talked about some of these innovations, when you saw how passionate they were, or when you could read some of their body language, or when you could say, hey, can you kind of take the time and talk to me about this and make that personal connection, it helps you understand the science a little bit more. It helps you understand what they're trying to communicate a whole lot more. And that kind of rounded out that steep learning curve. But I like to tell people all the time, when I first started, I didn't know a 510K from a PMA. I struggled to explain that one time to our sales manager back when I was with AHC Media and Medical Device Daily. But if you can stay in this industry long enough, and if you can, just focus long enough on the content material and have an understanding of the companies that you're talking to and see them each having an individual story, and also finding the conflict that the companies might have too, that helps round that steep learning curve down out a whole lot, a whole lot.
I
Yeah.
love that. That's great advice. And also something I was thinking about is the more that you get into the industry too, curiosity solves
Yes.
so much, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
The
Yeah.
more that you can just be curious and ask questions. And I've found, and I'd be curious about your own experience with this, but I found that this industry is extremely helpful. Like if you go with a genuine desire to learn and grow, people are like, great, how can I help you?
Now, that is one thing that I will testify to, and I will say was different from doing beat reporting, because when I was working with the small newspapers, it was all about holding back information. It was all about, "Mm, talk to you about this." But this industry, when you talk to people, when you show a level of interest and the ability to understand, they will talk to you for days, and they are very, very helpful. So that is another. I'm glad you brought that up, because that is another level that really, really helps to understand this industry a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, I love what you were talking about in regards to storytelling. You were
Mhm.
talking about, sometimes I feel like press releases they're getting out information. There's obviously a
Mhm.
really important point to them, but it
Mhm.
sometimes can feel very dry and slightly just inhuman, I suppose.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so I love
Mhm.
the fact that you were able to take what you saw, read a little bit
Mhm.
between the lines and go, okay,
Mhm.
I know there's a story here. Like you said, what did you overcome? What are the challenges you're still
Mhm.
facing? Yeah. I just love if you speak a little bit more to that fine art of digging through and finding the gems.
A lot of that is being a contemporary medtech historian and realizing that everything builds on something else, right? That there are different layers. I'll give you an example of this. Back in 2018, Boston Scientific was acquiring a lot of companies. I think they acquired like 10. That was the trend. And they bought a lot of different companies in a lot of different areas. And the easy story was Boston Scientific is on a spending spree. Look at what they're doing. Look at what they're doing. And that was the easy part of it. But what happened to Boston Scientific before? What happened to them when they acquired Guidant back in 2006? And that was heralded as one of the worst acquisitions ever. You, as a writer, as a reporter, as a journalist, when all of this is happening in 2018, I'm able to go back and say, wait a minute, this is a far cry from where the company was a few years ago because there wasn't as much information. They weren't as talkative as they used to be, as they are now. A lot wasn't communicated. But when you go back and you look at where they were and then you look at where they are now, that is a great story. And that's how you can read between the lines. I mean, you can see those connections. Okay, they're really building up their electrophysiology space, right? They're building up their cardiovascular offerings. This is something that was perhaps hurt or tainted during the Guidant acquisition and the fallout from it. So let me draw back from those past stories, make some connections, see the adjacency, see the parallels, and create a new piece of content from that really communicates the story of what's really going on with Boston Scientific. So it's being able to look to the past, realizing that things don't happen in a vacuum, and also to work on the trends, to look ahead at how the trends will develop and are developing.
I love that. And especially love the term contemporary historian. I was just giggling to myself about how wonderful that is. Okay, so all right. So going back to when you were growing up, could you have imagined yourself where you are now? Were you always interested in writing and journalism?
Oh gosh, you're gonna ask me about growing up. Oh, so I to answer your question, no, no. I am very blessed to be in this position. I never imagined myself here. I was a poor kid growing up in rural South Carolina. My mom was a teacher. My dad was a Vietnam veteran who became an educator, saying that for a reason. Read between the lines. He was tough. And but my mom always wanted something better for me, right? And my dad, he was just sports in the news. He didn't watch any movie. I don't think for as long as he lived. I think the only movie we saw together was Lean on Me with Morgan Freeman as Joe Clark. That's the only movie that my whole family watched. He was just that's all he did. And I wanted to impress him, and I wanted to be able to, he wanted an athlete, and that's clearly not what I was back then. But I just wanted to impress him. And I remember he would sit down, he would watch Crossfire. That came on, I believe, 7:30 on CNN. And Pat Buchanan, he was a host. I can't remember the other host. And he would watch 60 Minutes, and then he would watch the local news with Dan Rather on CBS. That's all he watched. And he would read the newspaper. It'd come out Mondays and Thursdays. And so I wanted to be a journalist to impress him. So I got on the school newspaper. I found out that I had a gift of not necessarily talking, but I had a gift of listening to people and being able to kind of relate to relate their stories or what they were telling me in writing. So I was able to write down what people told me in a sense. And so if you would have asked me, would I be editor-in-chief of MD+DI or anything like that growing up? No, that wasn't my intention. I just wanted to impress my dad. I just wanted to be a good reporter. And thankfully while he didn't live to see me be editor-in-chief, he did see me become managing editor of MD+DI. And my mom actually lived to see me become editor-in-chief. And, I remember when I told her and she was like super, super proud. So yeah, but no, I couldn't have imagined that. Me, a kid growing up in rural South Carolina in a trailer, no,
Yeah.
no.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that story. That's really powerful. And I actually love how inspirational it is too. Of course, you have to start somewhere and you're working your way up. And look where you are
Mhm.
now. It's incredible. And now you have been there now 8 years. Is that correct?
Yes, I've been with MDDI for 8 years now. Yeah, yeah,
Wow.
yeah. I'm going back, well, yes. I'm thinking back, yeah. I had to think about that, and I've been editor-in-chief. I think I took over in April of 2022. Yeah,
Nice.
April of 2022, yeah.
Excellent.
So, yeah,
That's
wow.
awesome.
My hair was a whole lot darker than I have gray streaks when I started. It was black,
What a
so,
journey.
yeah,
Oh, that's so
yes.
cool. Congrats. Yeah. So, as you've been a journalist, but maybe
Mhm.
specifically within medical device, what are
Sure,
some
sure.
interviews that kind of really stand out that you just, for their impact or how they touched you or how they touched others?
I would say some of my best interviews I did on the podcast, Let's Talk Medtech, because I could finally kinda let my hair down and my guests could let their hair down as well, and we could just talk and just it would it we could just be open and transparent. And sometimes that doesn't always happen when you're doing an interview. Sometimes some people are reading from the script, sometimes people are guarded, sometimes people like to use the old, "Okay, I know I said that, but that was off the record, please don't use it." Sometimes that happens. But to answer your question, some of my best interviews have been with Marissa Thayer.
Mm,
She is CEO of Deep Look Medical and Her Health EQ.
mm.
In fact, we just did a podcast with her, and it's not even fair to call that an interview because it's just like 2 old friends talking. And our banter is going back and forth, and I'm like, "Yeah, I saw some pictures of you, on Facebook. You were on this trip, you were on this trip." She said, "Oh, Facebook is still a thing. I just put everything in Instagram, so it funnels out." "What, are you trying to call me old?" "No, you're trying to say that old people use Facebook?" "No, no, no, I didn't say that." And just that, and then we leap into AI and how AI is really helping the cause with women's health right now, and how it's helping with imaging, and how it won't replace the radiologist or the physician, but it will give them an extra tool. But you see how comfortable that transition is. We're able to have those talks. We're able to have those conversations, and it's not stiff.
Yeah.
It's just like it's not like we're reading from a paper or we're just trying to be super, super guarded. So Marissa's a good person that I talked to. Chris Toth, he's the CEO of Vantive, and he had the most energy and enthusiasm about his job and his position, and it was just smooth. And we interviewed him for an episode of Let's Talk MedTech, and it was just incredible. He really opened up about the company. He talked about some of the goals, and it was refreshing to see a CEO, have that type of discussion, have those discussion points. So those were some of the most memorable interviews that I've had in recent months.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing those. That's fun. Now I'm gonna have to go and listen to them. Marissa was one of my first guests, and I couldn't agree more that the conversation was so just easy and natural, and she's got such cool things to talk.
Yes, 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 yes.
Yeah. So one thing I noticed about your LinkedIn was it seems like you are very fond of learning because you are
Mhm.
continually taking courses, maybe on and off LinkedIn. But I was looking through the laundry list of amazing courses you've taken, and I was like, that is impressive. So I'm curious if you could talk about that.
Oh gosh. Well, I look at some of the most interesting courses that I can find. And one of the things that I've been looking at is just artificial intelligence and generative AI. How to best use that, how to best write prompts, what are some of the pitfalls, just how to, for lack of a better term, master it or understand it a little bit more. Because I understand that content is changing and generative AI is a huge driver of that. I don't fear change. I want to change. It's just I don't know where change is going to. I don't know what that looks like now because we're in the middle of it. Something similarly happened to me back in 2006, I wanna say, when Google kinda came on the scene and was taking newspapers and publishing the entire newspaper online, and you could look at it for free. And I was like, this isn't a sustainable model. I need to get out of this. And I'm barely making enough to get by. I need to leave, but what do I need to go to? And that was the B2B experience. That was in MedTech, and that was where it was more focused, it was more targeted. There was a paywall, and the sales metrics were a whole lot different. It wasn't necessarily about buying an ad because someone is looking at the site or looking at your story or the ad impressions, but it was more who's going to buy in for this gated content or this content behind a paywall that specifically talks to them, not everybody. I think that's an issue that newspapers had back then. They tried to be something for everyone. And I don't think that turned out to work too well for them. But I just totally went off the cuff and went off line, just talked about everything except answering your question. So
That is,
oh gosh,
it is not. You're awesome. I absolutely love it. Okay, so, this is what I wanted to ask. So, as you have, maybe especially with the medical device side of things, as you have grown in your journalist career, are there any moments that really stand out to you as just affirming to you that, wow, I am in the right place at the right time?
Yeah, yeah, and one happened fairly recently, and it happened at West. I was, coming out of from the showroom floor in the Anaheim Conference Center, and I had my Informa name tag on, and I had my suit, and one of the guys at the door, he was a young person of color, and he came up to me, and he said, "Man, I wanna be just like you when I grow up." And I brought him in and I gave him a hug, and I couldn't say anything. And I walked up those winding stairs. I didn't take the escalator. You know what I'm
I
talking
do.
about. I didn't take that. I walked up those winding stairs, and by the time I got upstairs, I was in tears. And that was validation that, hey, you're supposed to be here.
Mm.
If, if not for just that one moment where that young man was able to see me and make a connection. And that was really emotional for me. And again, I grew up with a dad that was a Vietnam veteran. Emotions weren't allowed, so you had to hold it in. But that was a point that was just an emotional moment for me. And it said, yeah, you're supposed to be here. You're all right, Omar. You're supposed to be here. Because I think when you're in leadership, I think you struggle with that, especially coming into it, right? You have, well, for me, I had imposter syndrome. I just I why does anybody wanna follow me? Am I doing this right? Am I doing this wrong? Oh my gosh. And also, I wanted to be the person that always got all the accolades,
Mm.
or that because I thought that that was doing a good job. And that's not what leadership is. You will get some of those accolades, but your accolades are to build someone else up so that they can get the spotlight and so that they can become leaders in their own right. So you want to grow your professionals that are under you. And that was the challenge for me at first because I was a great soldier and I was a great person who could roll up their sleeves and I would jump head first into it and I would work and knock out and tackle the problem. But asking someone else to do it, you know, coming up with a strategy to do it was easy too, but just enforcing it, having someone else to do it, that was the tough part for me. That's what I struggled with. And so bringing back to when you were talking about that defining moment, that moment when that young man, when I embraced that young man, when I hugged him, that was saying, "Omar, you're supposed to be here." And that meant a lot. So, yeah.
That's a beautiful story. Thank you for sharing that. Oh, yes, I understand the imposter syndrome for sure. And, you know, I recently, as you know, had the opportunity to host the leadership summit at MD and West,
Mhm,
which was really an amazing experience. And there were moments I remember I was checking out the space ahead of time, looking to see
mhm,
what it's all going to be set up as. And I had this moment of like, you don't deserve to be here. And like that just very intrusive thought just came into my head. And
Mhm,
I just said, no, that's not true. It's not true. I've worked hard to be where I am.
mhm, mhm, mhm.
And apparently some people hear what I have to say.
Yes,
Not everyone, I'm
yes.
sure that's 1,000% fine. But it was just such an interesting, it's just, you keep having to have these moments, I feel like, of and sometimes outside validation from somebody who looks up to you like that young man, and
Mhm.
just to say, yeah, I'm okay to be here. In fact, I deserve to be here. I'm supposed to be here. I make a difference. At least I try.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's hard because you're trying to be humble, but you're also coming against all of these different things in your role. You have people above you, you have people below you. You're kind of like the sandwich generation when it comes to leadership and in your professional career. And you're not necessarily, I don't want to say fighting against them. I don't want to say that, but you're giving up
Yeah.
and you're giving down at the same time.
Yeah.
You're talking to your management team, to your managers, and you're giving them information and you're serving their needs, but you're also serving the needs of the people that work under you. You're giving them support. And so if you don't have anything to constantly fill you up, it can be it, I don't want to say draining, that's not the word, but it can take a lot out of you. So you sometimes don't see the role that you play because you're giving both ways.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, I had an amazing leader. She was a great leader
Mm.
because when I look at bosses, I look at people who tell you, "Okay, I want you to do this, I want you to do this, I want you to do that." All they wanna do is get the task done and go home. That's what I see as a boss, but a leader will actually sow into you, will actually nurture you, will actually tell you right from wrong, and will feel like they have a personal responsibility or stake, I'd say, in your growth, right? And that person for me was Daphne Allen. She was my predecessor. She is now editor in chief of Design News. It's a sister publication to MDDI. And I can always remember she was firm and assertive and but in a almost nurturing way. And if you came up with an idea that didn't quite jive right, she would talk to you, she would say, "Well, maybe we could look at it this way."
Mm.
It would validate the idea, but tell you you're not quite on the right path, but show that she's willing to help you get on the right path all in one blow. And that was so incredible. And I can remember at West, I pulled her aside because every time I see her, I talk to her and I tell her, "You've been such a great inspiration for me. I- I'm I'm forever thankful for you. I'd say the only bad thing is that you're no longer my manager. That's the only bad thing that I have to say, but she just taught me a leadership style. You
Mm.
don't have to yell and scream to get your point across. You don't have to be nasty. You can be assertive
Mhm.
and you can give support while being assertive.
Mhm.
I think that's something that is missed in a lot of roles. Just, "Hey, Omar, you might have done this a way that we didn't need to do it, but here's how we get back on track to do it. And I want you to think about what you did over here and how we can improve upon it." So it was just it it's just those conversations that I had with her that were, I mean, she really stands out to me as one of the best leaders that I've had. And there are quite a few more that I could mention, but definitely Daphne Allen. I owe her so much, and I'm so thankful to have met her. She is just an amazing person.
Shout out to Daphne.
Yes, shout out to Yes, yes.
Excellent. Oh, that's wonderful. I love hearing stories of really great leaders who make an impact, because it does matter so much in your experience at work, just as a whole, but just also your personal and professional growth. So, yeah, thank you for sharing that. So, all right, pivoting the conversation a little bit just for fun.
Sure, sure.
Imagine you were to be offered $1 million to teach a
Mhm.
masterclass on anything you want. It can be within
Mm.
your industry, but it doesn't have to be. What would you
Mhm.
teach?
Hmm. $1 million to teach anything? Oh gosh. You know what? I would teach really common sense, old school journalism. I would do that. I think that there are a lot of things that have been lost in journalism over the years. And that is one thing that I would teach, not necessarily the writing aspect of it, but just how to relate to people, how to talk to people, how to just be in a position where you can have discussions with a person. We have so many people nowadays that don't even know how to talk on a telephone. They don't know how to have a phone conversation. And I think that that is one of the basics for journalism, right? You got to be able to pick up that phone or hop on that Teams call and have a conversation with someone. I remember a few years ago, we had a journalist, and this person struggled with talking to people on the phone or doing those cold calls. And I said, you got to be able to breach that, and you got to be able to try and at least make that connection. And there are tips that you can do to really get that information out there to really make connections with people. There subtle things that you can do. But if you gave me $1 million, I would, yeah, that's what I would do. I would teach just common core principles of journalism.
Love it. Sounds like a great course. All right. How do you wish to be remembered after you leave this world?
Oh, gosh.
I know.
I'd say as a good husband and a good father. Those are two things that are really important to me. But I would love to be just to go out as a good husband and a good father. That's ultimately what I wanted.
Yeah. Wonderful. All right. And then final question.
Yes.
What is one thing that makes you smile every time you see or think of it?
Oh goodness. What's one thing that makes me smile? Oh gosh. I will say this. My youngest daughter, Emily, and we named her after my mom. She was a total surprise to us. Well, I will tell my age. I'm 47 years old, and she is now 2. So do the
Aw.
math. My other children are like in their teens. And Emily makes me smile because, you know, we didn't know that my wife was pregnant at the time. And then when we found out she was pregnant at 21 weeks, yeah, yeah.
Oh.
Yes, yes. When we found out she was pregnant, we didn't even we didn't know if Emily would survive. We did. She spent like 10 weeks in the NICU, and now she is a big, healthy toddler who has caused a lot of this to turn a lot grayer. But she makes me smile each time I see her. She reminds me of her grandmother, my mom, and she reminds me that miracles can happen.
Hmm.
So
Oh, I love that. What a beautiful answer. Well, Omar, this has been an absolutely amazing interview, and I am so very thankful for your time. Thanks for just sharing a little bit of your afternoon with me, and thank you so much for everything you're doing to change lives for a better world. Really appreciate it.
thank you, and thanks for having me on. And we've got to have you on Let's Talk MedTech.
Yeah, let's do it. I would love that.
Awesome,
All right.
awesome.
Well, thanks again.
All right, thank you.
The Leading Difference is brought to you by Velentium Medical. Velentium Medical is a full-service CDMO serving medtech clients worldwide to securely design, manufacture, and test Class 2 and Class 3 medical devices. Velentium Medical's 4 units include research and development, pairing electronic and mechanical design, embedded firmware, mobile app development, and cloud systems, with the human factor studies and systems engineering necessary to streamline medical device regulatory approval. Contract manufacturing, building medical products at the prototype, clinical, and commercial levels in the U.S. as well as in low-cost regions in 1345 certified and FDA-registered Class 7 clean rooms. Cybersecurity, generating the 12 cybersecurity design artifacts required for FDA submission. And automated test systems, assuring that every device produced is exactly the same as the device that was approved. Visit ValentiumMedical.com to explore how we can work together to change lives for a better world.